Hey everybody, Resmatter here. Welcome to part 5 of my Chaos Head Noah Let's Play. Last episode, the woman from, I think it was the first episode I played, or maybe it was the second episode, the one who was singing, she has reappeared. Fez, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is actually the singer of a band called Phantasm, who apparently is potentially predicting the new generation madness murders through her lyrics. So we learned about that, went to the show. There was a moment where apparently she looked at me. Whether that is my character's delusions once again, maybe he's seeing things that aren't there, or he's interpreting things in a different way, I'm not sure. But more importantly, we had another murder of a man in a bathroom with the phrase, "Whose eyes are those eyes?" written in the bathroom wall. So that is the phrase that just keeps popping up. So like, what the heck is going on? So yeah. Oh, and also we were introduced to a detective, Detective Bond, I believe, and his young partner, who was the guy that was at the school. And they are aware that my character, they don't know it's me, but a character, someone from Sume Academy, was seen running away from the scene of the crime. So now they're on the hunt for me. They don't know it's me, but that explains why he was at the school. It feels like kind of the walls are closing in on me. Eventually they're probably going to find out it's me. They're going to try and track me down. And especially with like this phrase keeping popping up that's like related to my character, you know, like how is this happening? So many questions. So let's jump back into it and see what happens next. All right, chapter 3, Shogun. Late night Shibuya, 4 a.m. Despite being named the city that never sleeps, very few people were currently present at its most popular locale, Scramble Crossing. Instead, many taxis were parked in their place, ready to carry away the drunks unwilling to wait for the first train of the morning. A generous amount of the drivers were reclined in their seats, napping. The more diligent drivers leaned against their steering wheels as their eyes stared idly towards the hot spots, the most frequent ones being Center Guy and the 107 building. However, they were not trying to ascertain whether or not any of the passers-by were potential customers. Instead, they focused intently on the movements of the sanitation workers who had arrived about 30 minutes before. The 5 to 6 men were thought to be sanitation workers due to their yellow armbands, each of which had "Sanitation Reporter" written on them. It was very likely that, without the armbands, no one would have recognized them as such. For there was something particularly odd about the men. They were all wearing black suits. Oh, maybe like the guy in the black suit who was at the doctor's office, who was watching me the first time I went to get checked out when I was young. Furthermore, ever since their arrival, they had yet to show any signs of cleaning at all. Also, there's the other thing, too, about the person that was handing out the handkerchiefs that said something about, like, blood, like B-type blood needed or something like that. And then there was the picture of the guy dead. It was in like some sort of it was a thing saying like blood be needed. So like there was another connection. It's like all of these loose ends, at some point I'm sure they're all going to connect, but I feel like it's going to take a long time for that to happen. Instead, one man held a strange instrument resembling a pendulum, and the surrounding men appeared to be measuring something. This was not restricted to just the one area, however. From the center of Scramble Crossing to the very edge of it, they left no spot untouched, writing all their findings down on various scraps of paper. Even now they were taking measurements from directly behind the traffic signals, silently observing the movements of the pendulum. At last, the instrument let out a small chime. Oh god, yeah, they don't look very conspicuous at all.
先月より38ポイントもアップか。思った通りだ。
But there was no one present in the early morning Shibuya to pay attention to the odd mumbling and behavior. The taxi drivers would speed off as soon as patrons boarded their cars, quickly forgetting about the mysterious sanitation workers. It's isn't the thing about like as long as you walk around carrying a clipboard, or you know, like you've got something that makes it seem like you are a worker and you're walking around in a hurry and with purpose, no one will bother you, no one will question you. The drunks were hardly conscious, leaving them unable to see anything around them to begin with. Female nightlife workers who had just clocked out, finally freed from the stress of smiling at repulsive drunkards, jumped into taxis to get home as soon as possible. Thus, not a single person was around to notice that the government had not scheduled any plans whatsoever for cleaning to take place that morning. Even after the weekend had passed, the uproar brought on by the fourth NewGen case, now dubbed the Vampire Incident, hadn't even come close to coming down. Yeah, they said something like all of his blood was sucked out of his body, and that's why there was the thing about, like, blood needed. A man's corpse had been found with all of its blood taken out of it, leaving the surface of the body a sickly, inhuman shade of green. It had been discovered in a bathroom at Shibuya Station, a part of the Ino-Kashira line. In addition, it was uncovered that a photograph of the corpse had been posted to an online auction, and considering the abnormality and brutality of the murder, it was inevitable both the mass media and @channel jumped on it. Special attention had been paid to the headline of the auction page, which read, "Type B blood in short supply." Tissue packs advertising an upcoming blood drive had been handed out in large quantities in front of Shibuya Station a few days prior to the incident, and the exact same message had been written on them. I had one of those tissue packs on hand. Reading back over it again now, the insanely strange words didn't read like an ad for a blood drive anymore. They read like some kind of advanced message of the crime. The police had supposedly been searching for the part-timers handing out the tissue packs, but they had yet to find any of them. However, there was one area where the vampire differed pretty heavily from the previous cases. While there had already been elements of it in the crucifixion case, the intent for it to be a theatrical crime was much more obvious with this one. A type of crime committed under full view of the public. These crimes and their subsequent investigations are reported on in detail by the mass media, who treat it almost as if it is a TV special. Adding to this effect, the perpetrators will sometimes even send a declaration of their crimes. It is extremely easy for theatrical crimes to sow disorder and chaos. For example, some individuals may view the criminal as a hero, and some may even be inspired to commit their own similar crimes. The latter individuals are known as copycat criminals. A few media outlets had been clamoring for increased police presence via patrols or for a late-night curfew for people under 18, but the number of young people visiting the city showed no signs of declining. They were just as packed as usual, with people flooding every nook and cranny of Center Guy and Scramble Crossing. The internet was so thirsty for news, a group of people trying to be Snake had snuck into Shibuya late at night to post live updates. And there had also been a phrase that was trending among the city's younger population. Gee, what phrase could that be? Whose eyes are those eyes? It wasn't just online either. That phrase had penetrated the ranks of each and every DQN walking around Shibuya. On @channel, it had become common practice to tack the phrase onto anything, regardless of if it was related or not. This week's ep of Bloodtoon won't have much serotonin. Whose eyes are those eyes? The new patch's weapons are so weak they're actually unusable. Whose eyes are those eyes? What whose eyes are those eyes is that from? And so on. Imagine if you had like a very specific inside joke or something, and all of a sudden everybody started saying it. It'd be so weird. To people my age, NewGen was probably just something new and exciting to follow, the newest shit show to obsess over, but to me it was the most aggravating thing possible. Regardless, a whole 3 days had passed since the vampire... That's so weird to say, vampire. I guess you just say it like vampire, right? Because it's vampire. So I had been able to calm down a little. Of course, there was still a nagging uneasiness in the corner of my mind, but by losing myself in ESO over the weekend, I'd been able to temporarily forget about all that irritating, inexplicable garbage. Even though I had had to go to school today, I'd been able to get through my classes by either sleeping through them or thinking about the stats and frame data of ESO's rarest items. I guess I'd leveled up a little bit. And so on my way home from school, I stopped by at Cafe for the first time in a while. It made me happy to see the room I usually used. Room 37 was vacant and ready for me. So we haven't seen Yua in a while. We saw a brief shot of her in the last episode when she was like just in her room, but she seemed to have kind of backed off on following my guy around, but maybe that's just because she got all the information she needed. The last time I'd set foot in it was at least 2 weeks ago, meaning that this was the longest gap I'd ever had between visits. Sour breeze flowing from the air conditioning, the manga stained with the smell of tobacco. How comfortable it was to sit back in the recliner. The snores of old men cutting through the silent, still air. It all provided the store's interior with an aura of pure nostalgia.
ルーム37の PC のチャットログを調べさせてもらいました。そこから分かったことは、あなた一人の自作自演。将軍は
And also, I don't know if whose eyes are those eyes were ever uttered in the chat log before the phrase got out to everybody, but that would just be another way that would connect me to the crimes.
あなた自身。
Remembering Yua's words, I cautiously glanced over at the neighboring room 36. I'd made sure no one was there when I entered the cafe, and since I wasn't hearing any noise, it was probably still unoccupied. Didn't stop me from being anxious about the possibility, though. I got up and slowly peered over the divider, and I saw that room 36 was still empty. Relieved, I sank back into my recliner. I hadn't seen Yua since then. We were in different grades, and I didn't go to school that often, so it made sense why we hadn't come across each other. Yes, you're one to talk. I couldn't help but pity her. She was clearly sick in the head. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. I'd be better off just leaving her be. Besides, meeting her at all had been a freak accident. Over the past 2 weeks or so, I'd been dragged into all sorts of random bullshit. Before then, my everyday life had been completely vanilla, and Misumi-kun was pretty much the only one who would talk to me. So why was it that basically nothing but weird, inexplicable bullshit had been happening to me recently? I wanted to avoid thinking about that garbage as much as humanly possible. That dying message had to be a coincidence. The words were all pretty common after all. If I'd thought of it, there was no reason someone else wouldn't have been able to as well. I had no interest in who that message was aimed at. No, I couldn't be interested. That was what I told myself anyhow. Suddenly, something started ringing nearby. Oh yeah, he's got a cell phone now. I jolted up in surprise, and a shudder ran through me as I stayed rooted in my recliner. It was the sound of a phone ringing, but whose was it? Because the store was so quiet, the electronic sound rang out all the louder. I looked around, but I couldn't locate a phone anywhere. A thought came to mind, and I fished around in my bag. Sure enough, the ringing was coming from the cell phone I'd bought just a few days ago. I thought that the sister had maybe would change the ringtone to something a little bit more, I don't know, not so basic. I glanced warily at the LCD display. Normally, the caller's name would be displayed. Was it a good idea to answer? I didn't like talking to people that much, so probably not. My rule is, when I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize, I don't pick up. I Google it after. If they leave a voicemail, I'll listen to it, but I do not pick up from phone numbers I don't recognize. Who the hell was calling me anyway? I hadn't told anyone my phone number yet. The only people who knew it even existed were my family, with Nanami's nosy ass making sure to put them in my address book. When one of the people registered in my address book called, their name should display, meaning that whoever was calling wasn't a family member. So, who was this? The phone kept ringing persistently. Did people who had phones usually force people to listen to the ringing for this long? I'd never used one of them before, so I wouldn't know, but it was incredibly annoying. To suddenly invade someone's privacy like this, cursing them with an obnoxious ringing until they picked up. A socially acceptable way to invade someone's privacy. That was exactly why I didn't want one of these stupid things. Oh, it stopped. Relieved, I checked the screen again. Missed calls 1 was displayed on it. I had no interest in returning this rando's call, so I decided to leave it be. It'd be a pain in the ass if this happened again in the future, so I should really figure out how to set up my voicemail. Cell phones were such a pain in the ass. I didn't even like phones to begin with. I mean, come on, they were freaky as hell. How exactly were you supposed to know if the person you were talking to on the other end was the actual person you thought it was? With how prevalent fraud was nowadays, were people actually taking the proper measures to make sure they were talking to the right person? I couldn't help but wonder how people would be able to calmly have a conversation with someone who might be an impersonator. Even if I understood the gist of how it worked, it was hard to believe my voice could somehow reach distant places through a phone line. When you talk on the phone, your voice is temporarily converted into electrical signals. They pass through the phone lines until they reach the recipient, where they are restored back to normal. That's when they become audible. In order to talk on the phone, you need to go through this conversion process at least twice. With a cell phone, your voice is first converted into electrical signals. Then it travels to a nearby base station via radio waves, which then run through normal phone lines to the switching station, then to the closest base station to the recipient before finally arriving at their cell phone right after. Okay, they're going to a lot of detail about this. I feel like this is going to come up later in some way about impersonators and phone calls and voices and all that stuff. It was a bizarre, complicated process. My voice was replaced by electrical signals. Could the other party really hear my voice, word for word, exactly as I'd sent it? In fact, wasn't it possible in the conversation process, my voice and my words could be transformed into something completely different? This feels like this is going to come up later. For example, if I called Nanami, but instead of connecting to her, it connected to some strange, shady facility. And there I would end up talking to someone I'd never met, who was only pretending to be. But then again, this Takia is a very delusional person, so this could be an instance of he's just overthinking things and maybe nothing like this is going to happen at all. Maybe they wouldn't even be a person, but a computer instead. That was the big reason why phone calls freaked me out so much. They were even scarier than talking to someone face to face. When I'd logged into ESO as Lise Lote, I'm still going to just call her Lise. As was often the case, 3 hours had passed by in the blink of an eye. It'd been 2 weeks since I'd last used her, but she made for a pretty good support, so I was feeling pretty satisfied. I left at cafe in a good mood and started heading home. Center Guy was as packed and noisy as usual, which irritated me. The bright lights illuminating the streets from the various shops made it hard to believe it was nighttime. And at the end of the well-lit road, despite the crowds, I clearly saw her, causing me to stop dead in my tracks. That one girl. Oh, shit. Okay, so that's the girl he saw. Okay, that's the girl that he saw, I'm guessing, when he slipped away to get away from Nanami when they were looking for cell phones, because he's talked about, like, a girl having a sword and how badass it looked. So now we got the swords again. We've got the girl at the beginning who I'm guessing is the pink-haired girl that we saw at the crime scene who had a sword. It could be... No, the pink-haired girl, it could be... I don't know what to think right now. This whole thing. What is it about, like, these things and then random swords? This is like Umineko all over again, where it's just like, okay, this is turning from, like, a psychological thing into, like, a fantasy. What's going on here? And this was the girl that was at the school that, like, basically was like, hey, who are you? So she's got a sword. The pink-haired girl had a sword at the very, very beginning, when we saw, like, the city decimated. Was that like a flash forward of what's going to happen? Was that another delusion? I don't know. In the midst of so many people, she glared directly at me, right smack in the middle of Center Guy, where people were coming and going without reprieve, where it was difficult to even walk straight. She stood still, resting the gigantic sword she carried on her shoulder. Fess, as well, she had some sort of sword. The spectacle was completely absurd. And yet no one paid her sword any mind. The stream of people flowed right past her with no change in demeanor. She was the girl I'd seen at 107. She had been there when Nanami was dragging me around to buy a cell phone. The shape of her sword, her sume uniform, her long black hair, everything matched perfectly. Back then, she had been standing at the top of the stairs in front of 107 watching the passers-by come and go. And I remembered the sharpness of her glare. I had met her once before, at school. She had these almond-shaped eyes and clean-cut, model-like features, and yet they only served to make her seem all the more unapproachable, and it was all capped off by that long, silky black hair that stretched all the way down to her waist. She was Girl B, the one who had so rudely probed me in the corridors after school one day, asking me who I was. Come to think of it, why was she glaring at me? Thinking maybe it wasn't me she was looking at, I turned around. Usually when something like this happened, more often than not, they were just looking at someone who happened to be behind me, but that wasn't the case here. And of course, all the girls just happened to be so interested in him. The one she was glaring at, her gaze filled with intense hostility, had to be me. Rose, I knew now what it felt like to be someone's prey. Glaring back was out of the question. I was always terrible at looking people in the eye, so I couldn't help but stare down at the pavement. I should run. Normally, I'd go home by taking a left at Scramble Crossing, where she was standing, and then I would end up next to Book Fat, but today I headed for the station instead. There were a lot of people there, but I'd rather that than deal with some scary 3D girl harassing me. Hell, she might even try to mug me. Or maybe she was only feigning being alone, and she actually had several DQNs lurking nearby, waiting for her to lure me in so they could beat the shit out of me. To be honest, they'd probably one-shot me. Like I'd fall for that. I swiveled to the right, only to be caught completely off guard. Somehow the girl was right in front of me. Flustered, I turned back around to look at Scrambled Crossing. She was no longer there. Okay, what is happening? Is this gonna become a magical girl thing? What? What? I looked in front of me once again. The girl with the sword was still glaring at me just as she had been before. What the hell? When did she get around me? Legs could only move so fast. That was practically teleportation. And besides, how could she have predicted that I'd turn around in the first place?
Oi.
Everyone has premonition abilities, precognition, apparently. Her voice reached my ears with extreme clarity. I frantically looked around me. I wanted to think she was talking to someone else, even though I already knew full well who she was talking to. I searched for anyone else she could be directing that "hey you" toward. But obviously there was no one. A number of businessmen walking by glanced at Girl B inquisitively, only to realize she wasn't talking to them, and walked away. Girl B, who had been standing there imposingly the whole time, took a sudden step toward me. That was all the confirmation I needed. Girl B had been targeting me after all. Rude as ever, in my 17 years of life I could probably count the number of times a girl had talked to me like this on one hand. Well, I guess there were times where Kirimiya Tsubaki, aka Sunko, had talked to me like that, but it was in a tsundere kind of way. A girl who is usually aloof and acerbic, but becomes affectionate when alone with her romantic interest. However, the definition has become more broad recently. Granted, Sunko was just another 2D character from the eroge Tell Me doll. Girl B kept getting closer and closer as those stupid thoughts raced through my head. Why does she feel so intimidating even though she's a girl, I wondered, but the reasons were simple. A sharp look in her eyes and the gigantic sword she was carrying. For a sword, it had a fairly unique shape. It was the kind of thing that operated on anime logic. It had an awesome design, but if you actually used it in real life, it would be completely unusable. It had to be from some mecha anime. Had there been any mecha anime that had started airing recently? Even though I knew it was a prop for some random anime cosplay, it still looked incredibly sharp and solid. Like, if you even so much as touched it, it would slice your fingers clean off. What a strange sword. Oh, the sword, I'm guessing. And that's why, like, nobody else can see the sword except me. Girl B had already cut the distance between us by 2 meters. If she swung her sword, it would hit me. Flustered, I took a step back, but it was too late. Girl B closed the distance further and further. Okay, here we go. She had actually swung the sword. I am so curious about what a positive, because my thoughts would be negative, right? Like, this girl's coming at me with a sword. But I'm kind of curious what would happen if I chose the positive one, so I'm going to do that. Maybe she's going to turn into, like, Magical Girl. She's going to have, like, basically a very skimpy outfit on or do a transformation or something. I don't know. Cowering on the spot, I covered my head. If I had dodged it, it would have hit my head for sure. I doubted it would have cut me, but with that kind of force behind it, it would have given me a concussion and permanently dented my skull. I hated pain. I was so shaken, my speech got messed up. Girl B looked down at me coldly. Man, she was really close. Her bare legs were right in front of me, and at this angle, I could almost see up her skirt. I frantically lowered my gaze. I knew for a fact she was going to accuse me of looking at her panties. But I didn't see them, I swear. I almost saw them, but I didn't, really. Besides, 3D panties don't get me off anyway. The only panties I fap to are either 2D or belong to figures. And then for some reason I couldn't comprehend. Girl B slipped off one of her shoes, and then she began to take off one of her knee socks. In the midst of this, the area under her skirt threatened to become visible, yet again, leaving me at a loss for where to look. I tried to find an opening to escape, but Girl B refused to take her eyes off of me as she continued removing her sock. Oh boy. Well, the now barefoot girl assumed an imposing stance, curving her lips in a scornful manner. Is she gonna be like, kiss my feet? Suddenly, Girl B's warm bare foot stepped directly on my crotch. The sudden humiliation rendered me hopelessly embarrassed.
ほら、どうだグリグリ。
やめ。
The people walking around didn't even look at us. Why couldn't there be at least one person who came to my rescue? What a cold society we lived in.
だんだん大きくなってきたぞ。
Having this happen to me, and right smack in the middle of Center Guy, it was mortifying, but I was enjoying it.
あー、ラメ。
Well, at least it was over relatively quickly.
見えるんだな。ディソードが。
When I came back to myself, I couldn't immediately grasp what was going on, leaving me to blankly stare up at Girl B. She was still wearing her shoes, and she wasn't stepping on my crotch or anything. What the... Had that been a delusion? So she wasn't trying to accuse me of seeing her panties? At any rate, a D-sword? What the hell was that? It was the first time I'd ever heard that word. Girl B had said it was a sword, and whatever she was carrying was definitely shaped like a sword, but... Why was she asking me if I could see it? I decided to just nod. I mean, I obviously could see it. There would be something wrong with me if I couldn't. Lugging around a sword that large and conspicuous, and in Center Guy no less. I'd be willing to accept if this was Akiba, but in Shibuya of all places?
そうか。お前も集められたんだ。
Gathered. Okay. Gathered? Who, and by who? At the very least, I was definitely here voluntarily.
エラーを見たことがあるか。
Error. Oh god, like what, are we having like errors and glitches in the world or something? What? In Japanese, please. A teasing phrase used on online message boards to tell an incomprehensible poster to please post comprehensibly. Was what I wanted to say, but unsurprisingly, I wasn't brave enough. Then again, if I said the wrong thing, she'd probably stab me, so... Regardless, this chick had been spouting nothing but nonsense ever since she'd first opened her mouth.
見たら教えろ。
After she said that, Girl B turned around. Her skirt fluttered in the breeze, and I could almost see her panties. I hurriedly shut my eyes.
私は3年の青いセナ。駅前の電車にいる。
I opened my eyes. The girl calling herself Senna had vanished. I was completely stunned, and it wasn't until I arrived back at my base that I realized I hadn't understood a single goddamn word she'd said. Alright, well this escalated quickly in a relatively short amount of time in this episode. Despite everything going on, I had to go to school 3 times this week. Somebody kill me. I just love, like, these wild situations that happen to him, and then the just banality of, like, oh, and now I gotta go to school. And I just love that kind of, like, he's like a main character who desperately doesn't want to be a main character. He just wants to live his ordinary life. He doesn't want anything exciting to happen to him. Actually quite relatable. It's like, this is, like, potentially a world... ending things, crazy stuff going on. He, you know, has to like maybe be the hero, and in a way he wants to be the hero because of like his obsession with ESO, but in real life he's too much of a coward to actually do anything. A mysterious screech resonated from far away. The sudden nature of it made me jump, and when I slowly looked in the direction it came from, Nanami rushed towards me with staggering speed. I tried to run away, but it was too late. She'd already circled around and blocked my path. She always did have amazing reflexes.
ちょっと、なんで妹見て逃げるの?
Maybe because you're incredibly annoying?
あ、 タもあるし。
Damn it, why has she decided to go to Sume of all places? That decision had done nothing but cause me endless pain and suffering. Whenever she ran into me on the way to school, she always stuck her nose in my business without fail.
ねえねえ、携帯どう？使ってる？使ってないでしょ。買ってからもう何日か経ってるけど、一度も家にかけてこないもんね。
Doing my best to break free, I started speed walking, but Nanami was determined to keep up.
家に生存報告の電話ぐらいしなよ。そのために買ったんだから。どうしても嫌なら、ナナの携帯にかけるだけでもいいからさ。
Aw, she's actually so caring. Like, she's so sweet. But, like, I'm sure the reason she wanted to go was partially she seems like she's a very, typical teenage girl. She's probably into fashion and wanting to be popular and stuff, so she probably wanted to go to Sume for the uniforms, like they said. But I also wonder if it's partially because, like, she wanted to look after her brother, like, her brother's cut off from the rest of the family, so she wanted to keep an eye on him.
「お母さん心配してるんだからね。そもそもちゃんとご飯食べてんの？どうせコンビニ弁当ばっかなんでしょ？やっぱお兄に一人暮らしは無理なんだよ。家に帰ってきなよ。
You butt. So cute.
ナナがどんな気持ちでお兄の様子見に行ってるか分かってる？
It is sad. It's like the younger sister happened to be like the older sibling looking after their brother who just can't take care of themselves.
いつも心配でしょうがないんだからね。
Shut the fuck up. What the hell is your problem? Are you my mom or something? And stop talking about shit like this when we're on the side of the road. It's humiliating. I had already been feeling like shit, yet this bitch had somehow managed to come along and make me feel worse. Oh, I really hope he ends up, like, becoming more likable. I've played games where you have kind of an unlikable protagonist, but it's usually because they're, like, kind of borderline monsters. Like Song of Saya, for example. This guy is just, like, he has his family that cares about him, his sister that's worried about him, and all he's thinking about, like, oh, you're so embarrassing. Oh, like, I have problems and you're just making me feel worse. Oh, it's just, I know everybody's different, and I'm sure, like, he sees it as overbearing, but, like, just count yourself lucky that you have family that actually give a damn about you. There was nothing on this earth more embarrassing than walking to school with your younger sister. The situation came about quite often in Eroge. Hell, I'd always longed for it to happen to me. But Nanami was nothing compared to 2D little sisters. Less than nothing. You know what? At least it's not the other way. At least it's not the complete opposite direction where he's, like, into his sister. So it could be worse. Damn it, world. Give me a cuter younger sister. A slightly tense atmosphere hung in the air between us as we walked side by side towards school. I looked at Nanami to see if there was any chance of escape before we reached the gate. Even though she had been yammering on and on just a bit ago, she had fallen completely silent, now walking with an absent-minded look on her face. It even looked like her eyes weren't really focused on the road, but that was probably just my imagination. Her footsteps were unsteady. Oh no, something must be wrong with her, I suspected. She kept on swaying back and forth, and about a moment later she stumbled right out into the road, right as a car came racing toward her. Panicking, I grabbed Nanami's arm and yanked her back. The horn of a car blared as it sped by. She just barely avoided getting run over. At least he did something. I'll give him props for that.
あれ？
Nanami blinked a few times, then tilted her head to the side.
ナナ、今なんであんなこと？あれ？
I was at a loss for words. She was an honest-to-God fucking idiot. She didn't even understand her own actions. For the record, that wasn't Moe, not even close.
何やってるんだよ。車にひかれたいのか。
車なんて 来てた？
Yes, there was a car. What was up with this total fucking ditz of a sister?
ねえお兄、今ヒューヒューヒューンっていう音聞こえなかった？
What? What was she talking about? I hadn't heard jack shit.
その音聞いてたらね、なんだかぼんやりした感覚になって。
Is there something going on about, like, it's causing people to want to kill themselves or something, or to die?
で、あそこに
Nanami pointed at the corner of the road.
お父さんとお母さんが立ってて、ナナを呼んでたの。
What was it? Hold on, let me go to the backlog here. What was it that, what was her name? Senna? What did she say? Like, have you seen, like, the terror or the glitching or something like that in the world? An error. Maybe that was an error. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. When I looked to where Nanami was pointing, I didn't see our parents. Instead, I saw a creepy man standing in that exact spot. He wore a plaid shirt, fingerless gloves, jeans rolled up at the bottom, and white sneakers. He had a rucksack on his back that was filled to bursting. He looked like an otaku plucked straight out of Akihabara. Capping off his outfit, he was holding a video camera in one hand. Did he have a voyeur fetish or some shit?
おい、他人を指さすな。
God, what a rude-ass sister. Besides, it'd make no sense for our parents to be here in the first place. They lived in Shimokitazawa, after all.
おかしいな。確かに呼ばれたのに。
The man started looking our way, then he pointed the camera lens at us. What the hell was wrong with him?
行くぞ、ナナミ。
Frightened, I quickly ran from the scene, leaving Nanami behind.
あ、お兄、ちょっと待ってよ。
I continued to ignore Nanami until we got to school, upon which I ditched her to walk down the noisiest ever hallway toward my classroom. When walking down the hallway, stay along the edge. Don't walk too fast or too slow. Don't make eye contact with anyone. Those were the 3 rules I always followed. That was how I didn't stand out in school. I transformed myself into an existence akin to air itself. That was my secret to success. Yet, people like him definitely made it hard for it to actually work. Catching up to me from behind, Misumi-kun greeted me in his normal, overly friendly fashion by clapping a hand on my shoulder.
おいっす挨拶ぐらいしろってま、お前がそういうやつだってのは分かってるけどよ
I also want to know, like, what does Misumi see in Takumi? Like, it doesn't seem like it's some sort of, like, I'm pretending to be your friends, but I'm gonna, like, bully you and stuff. It's like he actually seems to want to be his friend.
なあこの前 D 組の女子の話したよなめったに学校来ねえけどすげえ可愛い女子がいるってその子岸本綾瀬って名前なんだけどよ実はその岸本に関してすげえ発見したんだ
Misumi-kun suddenly lowered his voice and looked around us. It was just going to be something vulgar, wasn't it? Already tired of his BS, I almost let out a sigh.
フェスいるだろ
Oh, shit! Of course. Of course Fest goes to our school as well. What are the odds that all the girls are gonna come to our school at some point? And then there's that blonde girl from, like, a couple of episodes ago where she was burning her stuff. She's probably gonna show up at some point, too. But what he said made me bite it back.
その岸本ってのがフェスなんだよ俺マジビビったぜまさかフェスがうちの学校の生徒だなんてよしかも俺らとダメだってことだぜ
For whatever reason, Misumi-kun leaned his upper body out the window, then gazed up toward the sky with a look of pure ecstasy.
運命ってきっとこういうことを言うんだな
This was the 3rd floor. If he were to slip, he'd fall to the ground and break his neck, ending his life just like that. My anxiety steadily climbed as I watched him. Misumi-kun leaned farther and farther and farther out the window before switching his gaze down toward the entrance beneath it.
噂をすればなんとやらだタク岸本を発見したもうすぐここに来るぜ
When With so many coincidences piling up one after the other, maybe it really was fate, not that I cared. Like, what are the odds that the lead singer of a pretty popular band just happens to be a student at this school and nobody knows?
よし、待ち構えてやる。
Is it a situation like
見てろタク。
when she doesn't have her makeup on, nobody recognizes her? He was brimming with self-confidence. Alpha males like him really were impressive. Picking up girls and all that was a completely different world for me. It wasn't even worth trying. A few moments later, Fess, Kishimoto Ayase appeared. It was just like Misumi-kun had said. She really was Fess. I made sure of that while observing her from a safe distance. I still couldn't believe she was in the same year as us. She was wearing a sume uniform. A distinct aloofness came from her expression as she walked slowly down the hallway. It gave off a completely different impression than the one she had had on stage. Back then, despite her apathetic tone, I had felt a sense of power and liveliness emanating off of her. But now the aura she gave off felt listless and unapproachable. Ignoring this, likely deliberately, Misumi-kun strolled over to her with the same overly friendly attitude he always had with me, then casually stopped right next to her.
Yo, Kishimoto-san. Oh, hayo.
His smile was so invigorating despite being so obviously fake. I had no idea how he was able to act like that around someone he barely knew. That's why we love him. That's why we admire him. Then again, I didn't really want to be him.
俺、三角大輔。よろしく。おっと、初対面とか思ってるだろう。でも違うんだな、これが。俺さ、こないだファンタズムのライブ行ったんだよね。だから、君に会うのは2度目。で、その時君の歌声に、こう、なんつうの？ビビってきちゃったんだ。別に俺、ミーハーとかじゃねえよ。惹かれたのはさ、詩とか君の可愛さとか、そういうところもあるけど、でも何より一番すげえって思ったのはやっぱバンドとしての完成度っつうか、あの音あっての君の歌声っつうの。ちなみに俺も実はバンドやりたいなって思っててさ、よかったらああいういいバンドメンバーを見つけるコツとか、バンドの先輩としての心得みたいなもの教えてくんねえかな。あ、今すぐじゃ迷惑だろうから、そうだな、放課後とか暇？どっかで二人きりでじっくり話さない？
Misumi-kun just kept on talking and talking with no breaks. His tone was different than usual and it was obviously fake. Not only that, but he wasn't hitting on her directly, instead using the band angle in order to invite her somewhere nonchalantly. I never heard this fun fact about Misumi-kun wanting to start a band before. It had to be a lie. He was willing to go that far in order to win some points, to force a flag rather than obtaining it naturally. But she just oh, ooh, interesting. Bess didn't even so much as look at him. I am so curious what happens if I do the negative one. She simply continued to walk down the hallway at the same pace, as if not a sound had reached her ears.
なあ、聞いてる？
Suddenly, Fez stopped in her tracks. Her slightly lowered gaze slowly rose up, and then she looked at me. Me? Come to think of it, the same thing had happened at the concert. It had felt like Fez was staring directly at me. Just in general, I'd been stared at by a whole bunch of freaky 3D girls over the past couple of weeks. God, what the hell was going on? Was I becoming popular now?
Hi.
When she called to me, I snapped to attention and replied. The otherworldly aura radiating off her entire body had me viewing her as someone older than myself. But then again, I knew for a fact that she and I were in the same year of school. Fez signaled toward Misumi-kun, who had been following her around with a jerk of the chin.
おいおい、こんな人呼ばわりはひどくね？っていうか、こんな人ってどんな人だよ？
鬱陶しい人。
はあ？
Oh boy. Is she just gonna, like, kill him or something? The look on Misume-kun's face turned very clearly sour. But Fez left the sharp glint in his eye unanswered, letting it pass by her without any interest. What a nasty atmosphere. I didn't want to be involved in this. I was a total embarrassment when it came to fighting, be it physical or verbal. Besides, if I caused any problems at school, it would have an impact on my evaluations. To avoid getting caught up in it, I should probably get out of here right away.
何もしかして岸本さんさ、俺のことバカにしてる？
別に。でも、迷惑よ。
あ、そうなんだ。そういうこと言うんだ、岸本さんって。ちょっとさ、人のいないところで二人でゆっくり話そうぜ。
Misume-kun placed a hand on Fez's shoulder, his smile trembling with rage. Her eyebrows twitched in response.
触らないで。
そう言うなって。いいからちょっと付き合ってよ。
触らないでって言ってるの。
And I was just waiting for her to whip out that sword, just chop his hand off.
うっせえな。ついてこいって言ってんだよ。
バカな人。
Did it actually happen? It happened in an instant. Even though I'd seen the whole thing, I still couldn't comprehend exactly what had happened. Yes! Yes! Amazing. Before I could even blink, that awesome mic stand, or maybe it was a sword, was now being held tightly in Fess's hand. I had no idea where she had retrieved it from, but she now brandished it with incredible ease. And then... Misume-kun's left hand was cleanly severed from his wrist. An explosion of blood erupted from the wound, and the severed hand fell to the floor. The hallway was turning crimson. I hadn't seen anything. I hadn't seen anything at all. I hadn't seen her draw her sword. I hadn't seen the trail of light as it carved where it was swung. I hadn't seen Misume-kun's arm get lopped off. It had all happened in the blink of an eye. By the time I'd realized what had happened, it was already over.
手が俺の腕が
Misume-kun collapsed on the spot, frantically picked up his hand and tried desperately to reattach it to his arm. His screams echoed throughout the hallway. All the students around us screamed and ran off in a panic. Oh, damn. As for Fez, she was still holding her sword, calmly admiring the chaos. Then for the second time she looked at me. Her red tongue slowly cleaned her lips as a fierce blush dyed her cheeks, her smile stretching the color across her face.
気持ちいい。
No such carnage had unfolded. While I was over here drowning in my moronic delusions, Fess was murmuring something in a low voice, only to up and disappear soon after.
自信なくすぜ。くそ。
And this dude's, he's a bit of an asshole and a player, but I'd like to hope that he would never say that to a girl like, "You're coming with me, bitch." That doesn't seem like his style. Misume-kun was sulking, having been completely and utterly disregarded. Considering how she was able to deter an alpha male of his caliber like he was no lower than a spur on the boot of hers, to deter him like he was nothing more than a typical monsieur, maybe the other team was what Fez preferred, a true Yuri connoisseur. An archetype that refers to women that see other women as romantic interests.
それはすごくいいスールです。
Especially if she was a lolly type character like Nanami. That's the stuff. Ew! Ew!
あんな不愛想な女、もう二度と相手にしてやるもんかよ。
Ugh, typical. Guy gets shot down and immediately like, oh, what a bitch.
ああ、うぜえ。大体何が剣を見つけろだ。わけわかんねえ。
Wait, okay, so she's also talking about like a sword, right? Well, we knew she had one.
岸本がそう言ってただろ。剣を見つけろ。そうすれば救われるって。
Salvation.
なたく、ファンタズムの歌にそんな歌詞でもあるのか？
A sword. Could it be that thing from my delusion earlier? That mic stand that I hadn't been able to figure out if it was a sword or not? So maybe in his delusion when he saw her swing the mic stand, he saw it as a sword, but it wasn't actually? At the show? I don't know. Come to think of it, there had been another person a couple of days ago that had interrogated me about a sword. That Senna girl, the one who was absolutely terrifying. I'd actually thought she was going to slice me in two. The sword she'd been carrying was a different shape than the one Fez had, but they had a similar aura to them. Could the two of them be connected somehow? I didn't know. There was way too much shit I didn't know. That's how I'm feeling right now. Shogun, the demon girl, Yua, Fez, Senna, swords. As was my old habit, I jotted down a list of all the things I didn't know enough about in my head. I'd meant to put myself as one final item on the list, but I decided against it. I was completely normal. It was the stuff happening around me that wasn't. That was the most obvious conclusion. Yes, dude, you are totally fine. Was Fez my ally or my enemy? It would be nice to know at least that much. Problem was, I didn't have the courage to ask her. Today I headed straight for Animate without stopping by at Cafe. The reason, of course, was to finally pick up my long-awaited Bloodtoon figure, Seraton, post-awakening version. Oh, is he gonna run into Yua? Maybe Yua actually is a fan, and she actually wants to pick up her thing. That'd be awkward. While I was in checkout, Yua's face crossed my mind for a second, but I cut off those thoughts immediately. I glanced at the Seratons that were set on display in order to attract customers, but since the sculptor was Kijima Yoshio, not a single word needed to be said about their quality. I had to get home fast so I could enjoy her every nook and cranny as soon as possible. Ugh. As long as I could admire Seraton's face every now and then while I played ESO, I was content. So why did the entire third dimension do nothing but bring me trouble? It plagued me even now. I headed straight for my base in high spirits, forgetting all about Fess and swords and whatever else, practically skipping the entire way home. Ah, there they are. Oh no, they're gonna stop me? While I was about 50 meters away, I encountered two men who carried an unmistakably abnormal air about them. I attempted to pass by them without making eye contact, but they were very clearly watching me. The first of the two to call out to me was a dull older man, one that looked like he belonged at a cycling racetrack gambling his life away. His hair was a mess and his unshaven beard was somehow worse. He wore a worn-out old suit, a sloppily tied necktie, and dress shoes that didn't show a trace of being cared for. All of it came together to form an unparalleled example of a man who had failed to get ahead in life. For some reason, the fact he was flapping a fan at himself only served to further emphasize how pathetic he looked. His expression was similarly languid, his mouth curled into a flippant smile. And yet, when our eyes met for a split second, I knew he wasn't really smiling. There was nowhere to run. As I searched for something to reply to them with, the two men made their way up to me. The older man took out a black badge from his suit and held it out toward me. It was the same kind of police badge you'd see in various TV shows, but it was obviously the first time I'd ever seen a real one. They've finally come for me. They could only be here for one thing, the crucifixion case. I'm guessing they don't know it's him, but they see the uniform and they just figure like, oh, we'll just ask around.
もちろん強制じゃないんだけどね。あ、そんな身構えなくていいよ。本当話聞くだけだから。
The way he spoke didn't show a trace of trying to intimidate me. The other younger detective, however, wore a strict expression as he nonchalantly moved to block my path. Sweat started running down my neck. If I made any wrong moves, they'd likely suspect me of being the culprit and haul me down to the station right then and there. I didn't want that to happen. I resigned myself, then gave a small nod.
君さ、俗に言うニュージェネレーションの狂気って知ってるかな?
I knew it. I wiped the beads of sweat off my forehead, then gave him a nod in reply.
じゃあ、3番目に起きた通称貼り付け殺人事件も当然知ってるよね。この近所で起きたわけなんだけども、その目撃者を探してるわけよ。あ、ちなみに君、名前聞かせてくれる?
A gulp forced itself down my throat. This wasn't some bait and switch shit, was it? Or maybe they were a bunch of con men who were only acting like policemen, while in reality they were just mining my personal information so they could put it to ill use. They could even be the demon girl's underlings.
あれ答えてくんないのかな
If they started to suspect me, there'd be no end to it. What should I do? If I gave them a fake name, they might arrest me immediately.
ああ、個人情報保護法とか気にしてるおじさんそんなに信用なさそうに見えるかな
I'll say, either way, his friendly way of speaking had to be just an act.
西条匠
In the end, I figured there was no way around it, that it was in my best interest to answer honestly.
西条匠くんでいいかい
I shook my head.
本当に
Huh? What was that supposed to mean? I had purposely given him my real name, so what the hell was that reaction?
いや、これは失礼。今のは気にしないでくれ。
The detective's unnatural laughter rang throughout the quiet residential area. Ugh, just hurry up and let me go already.
その制服、水明だよね。何年生
Did I have to answer stuff like that?
悪いね。聞き取れなかった。おじさん、もう年だから耳遠くてさ。もう一度言ってくれる
2年生
ああ、2年生ね。どうも。で、西条さん。聞きたいことってのは、先月の29日の午後6時から10時頃にかけて、どこで何してたかなんだわ。
Were they asking me for my alibi? Did that mean they suspected me? That's ridiculous.
いや、別に君を疑ってるわけじゃなくてさ。その時間にこの近くにいたなら、怪しい人物を見かけたとか、何か音を聞いたとか、ないかと思ってね。
For some reason, the way the guy talked was really starting to get to me. Maybe talking in a way that deliberately agitated the subject was some kind of interrogation technique. Of course, I had seen someone suspicious. I had seen someone very clearly and with my own two eyes. But I wasn't sure if it'd be a good idea to tell that to the shady old guy. What would I do if I told him and then the demon girl came back for revenge? It seemed like the demon girl was letting me run free for now, but she still had Shogun on her side, and he was equipped with precognitive powers. So by that logic, that must have meant the demon girl had some sort of insane power as well. And if that were true, and I told the police about it, she might find out about it immediately because of her clairvoyance or whatever. And then she'd come to kill me right after.
なあ、西条くん。今日はそんなに暑いか
Oh god, he's just looking so suspicious. My heart rate skyrocketed. If I stayed silent like this, they'd absolutely suspect me of being the criminal. But at the same time, I was scared if I lied and said I didn't see anything, that they'd see right through me. The older man fanned me a couple of times with his fan. The cool breeze rustled my hair.
もうすっかり秋だ。汗かくほど暑いとは思えんけどな。まあ、体質ってのは人それぞれだしな。
Ironic, considering he was the one walking around with a fan. But he was right. It wasn't all that hot out today. It was perfect, actually. The kind of temperature you'd actually enjoy spending time in. I'd wiped the sweat off my forehead with my sleeve countless times now.
僕はやってない
Oh, oh. Yeah, that's like the worst way you could have answered. He was just asking if you had seen anything suspicious. Oh boy, he's definitely gonna be on the radar now.
おお。
The look in his eyes shifted. I realized that I'd slipped up, but I had no idea what exactly had tipped him off.
何をやっていないんだ
They definitely suspected me. I had to answer honestly. Staring at the manhole cover right beneath my feet, I began to blurt out everything.
見たんです貼り付けの現場そこに女がいたんですで血まみれにして死体の前に杭がたくさん死体に突き刺さっててあれ500本は絶対超えてた異常だ死体がハリネズミみたいになってて女は僕を見てよかったって笑ってた あの女は悪魔だ。人間じゃない。ニュージェネの母親には人を超えた存在なんだ。ヨシとかすごい超能力とか使う。
He probably lost them there. Maybe they're just like, oh, he's just a crazy kid. Okay. Upon saying that much, I realized the two detectives were staring at me with their eyes wide. Maybe they didn't believe me. Thinking that, I clamped my mouth shut.
悪魔か。なるほどね。そいつは参考に
So
な
there
った
you
よ。
go. So that's what you do. It's just you act crazy, except in his case, he truly believes it.
本当です。
And that's the thing too, is like if you act like you're telling the truth, in his mind he truly does believe it. Maybe they're like, oh, we can't take anything this kid says seriously. There's clearly something wrong with him. And I wonder if they're going to look into Takumi. They're going to see that he went to get like psychiatric evaluations when he was younger. And they'll be like, oh, so his testimony or whatever can't be believed.
ああ、わかってるわかってる。貴重な情報だよ。
僕を警察で守ってください。
その前に、その女の年はわかる。服装とか顔の特徴とか。
Literally, she has pink hair. She'd stand out so much.
水明。
水明って、水明学園？
その制服着てた。
つまり、西条君と同じ学校の生徒か。
And that's the thing too, is like they've kept this information to themselves, right? About the person running away from the scene of the crime being someone with that uniform. So they're probably like, okay, either he actually is telling the truth or he's just trying to cover up for the fact that maybe he did it himself. After simmering on that for a moment, the old man grinned. He then muttered something that could be either an actual question or just mumbling to himself.
何年生だろうな、その女子高生は。何年生だと思う？西条君。
わからない。
じゃあ、なんて名前だと思う？
わからないよ。僕はあの悪魔の名前なんて知らない。
その女の身長、体重、あとついでにスリーサイズについては。
What was up with this old man? Was he screwing with me? How was I supposed to know even a single one of those? Did he think I could instantly get all those measurements from a single glance? Oh yeah, sure, I absolutely had such a stupid power. Oh wait, no I didn't, because this wasn't a goddamn rom-com manga.
なるほど。黙ってるってことは、わからないってことだね。結構。参考になったよ。これは本部に戻って検討しないといかんな。
先輩、マジっすか？
Waving his hand to silence the dumbfounded younger detective, the older man signaled something to him with his eyes.
あ、西条君、ちなみに連絡先とか教えてもらえる？
なんで？
And of course the fact now that he has a cell phone, right? I knew they wouldn't believe me. They wanted to label me as some nut job and falsely accuse me of everything.
ああ、だって悪魔だっけ？そいつから君を守らなくちゃならないだろ？
Oh, so that was why he'd asked. Thank God they actually believed me. If I could get the police to protect me, it'd be incredibly reassuring. Yes, the enemy was a demon, so the police would only get one shot if they went up against her, but it was better than being unarmed. Feeling slightly relieved, I took out my phone, the phone I'd bought a few days prior, and showed him my phone number. The younger detective scribbled it down in his notebook.
忙しいところありがとうさ。君の身の安全は警察が保証するから。
They were probably just like, holy cow, we just stopped this random Sume, academy student just, looking to ask questions and got all of that out of him.
じゃあ、また何か聞きたいことができたら電話するかもしんないんで、その時はよろしくね。イルスとか使わないでくれよ。今のところ警察にとっては君は重要な人物だからな。
え？
君の目撃証言は事件解決の重要な手がかりになりそうだ。じゃあな。
The two detectives bowed their heads and promptly took off. After taking a glance at me over his shoulder, the younger detective whispered something to the older one. The older man paid him no mind and simply continued to walk. I let out a long, long sigh. That was intense. It was the first time I'd ever been questioned by actual detectives. I'd acted pretty suspicious without meaning to, but they'd believed me anyway, somehow. Good. Or God, I'd give anything for the police to arrest that demon girl. Then again, the police didn't have any special powers, so maybe I should keep my expectations low. I then noticed my mouth had gone incredibly dry without me realizing, so I redirected myself to the nearest vending machine and got myself a cola. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for this episode. Apologies for it being a little bit of a shorter one. This is being recorded alongside me finishing up Persona 3, which is taking a long time, so unfortunately I didn't have much time to record this week. But in the short amount of time, we did find out who the girl with the sword was from the previous episode that he was staring at. It's one of his fellow students, of course. Everyone seems to go to the school. Speaking of which, we have learned that Fez also goes to the school. What a coincidence. So just more and more girls appearing. The whole thing with, like, the swords, that is a weird thing. All the girls seem to have swords. We saw the pink-haired girl at the very beginning of this game also have a sword as well. And now he's got the cops kind of, like, he's on their radar as well. So that's not good. Things just keep getting worse and worse for Takumi. He's just spiraling even more into delusions. So yeah, maybe he wasn't wrong when he said if he just never left his room, things would be better for him. Just more and more questions. That is going to do it for me. We're going to see what craziness happens next time. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned next week for episode 6. Until then, bye. Shoutouts to my top tier patrons: Salieri, Revealing Storm, Amlife, Icognito, Saturn Sins, Doubless91, Harry Gazif, Kenju Storm, and Lynn's VA.